744. 744.
I want to welcome everyone back this evening. Remember the meeting that will be immediately following the services tonight for the lectureship. Everyone is certainly invited to be there, but those who have specific works that they are involved in, they specifically need to be there. Our lectureship, of course, begins this Saturday evening, 7 o'clock. We'll be having 2 lessons then, the first one by Brother David Brown, and then followed that with Brother John West speaking. So looking forward to that, of course, expecting a great lectureship. Let's all be here for that. We've been looking at some lessons dealing with the fact that we are at war and that we as Christians, when we become a Christian, we enter into a battle, into a warfare. It is a spiritual warfare, is what we noted first, that Christ's kingdom is a spiritual kingdom. It's not a physical kingdom, and as such, the warfare that we enter into is going to be a spiritual warfare. And we're thus soldiers in the army of God and in the army of Christ. We don't hear about that a great deal today within the church because we've gotten away from that aspect of battle and fighting, and we've been moved more toward friendship, evangelism, and things like that. Instead of, we're in a warfare. But we are, as described by the Scriptures, an army of God, an army of Christ. And we're to go out and fight the good fight of the faith, fighting these spiritual battles. And we noted that we are at war with Satan, that he is a treacherous, evil spirit and opponent. He is our adversary. That is an opponent in a lawsuit. The lawsuit that we're having is that lawsuit of life and death. And he is our opponent. He is wanting us our death, and God is wanting our life. And he is one who is the devil, and that means a slanderer, in that he's going to slander those who are children of God. And he is the accuser of the saints to God. And he's a roaring lion, walking about seeking whom he may devour, showing his fierceness with which he stalks the righteous. And we noted the ways in which he tried to, and the fact thus, because he is that type of an individual or that type of a spirit, and that has that nature, we must always be on guard and watchful, alert. Then we want to notice this evening that we are at war against the worldly and the ungodly in our nation. Solomon, writing by inspiration of God, would state that righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs 14 and verse 34. It amazes me that we have so many, even within the church, who are more concerned with the physical, social issues of our day than they are with the spiritual issues that we're facing. And I'm talking about in our nation. Our nation and much of the world has gone to just a disgraceful state in relationship to morals. I can remember growing up hearing preachers talking about the fact that America was becoming like Sodom and Gomorrah, And even at that time, they would say if God allows this nation to continue, then He's going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Oh, well, brethren, it hasn't gotten any better. It's gotten much worse through the years. The ungodly are in a fight with the godly and those who are righteous and those who are moral to get federal laws passed that are going to legalize immorality. Homosexuality or homosexual movement in our society, and I have difficulty calling them gays because I'm just not going to use that good term in a way that they want to use it. But they are a very powerful force within our society. Anyone who denies such has just simply closed their eyes to what's going on in our society today. We have seen that for years within the entertainment industry, where they have a major stronghold. You can say anything you want to and portray Christians in any way that you want to within the entertainment industry, but if you present a homosexual in a negative light, well, that's just not going to go. And they're going to lobby and they're going to get that changed. They're not going to allow that to take place. But they will continue to emphasize, yeah, go ahead and present those who are Christians, and I'm using Christians there, of course, in an accommodative sense. Go ahead and portray those Christians in a negative light. Show them as the perverts and the ungodly and the wicked, and they are the scourge of our society. And always present the homosexual in a positive light. That's because of the homosexual influence within the media. We see that also in several other areas, but now then it's also having its effect upon the laws of our society. The Gay Bill of Rights, for example, is being pushed within our nation. And if that should pass, then it is very possible that mandatory quotas for homosexuals would be set forth, that a business, daycare centers, and yes, even churches will have a mandate: you must hire a certain number of homosexuals. And of course, if you don't, then you can be taken to court. And once you have those homosexuals in employment, it would make getting rid of those individuals almost impossible. Well, that's the emphasis that is being seen within the bills that are going to our nation now. There's another Homosexual Classrooms Act. And this act would be to force every school to introduce homosexual curriculum. And that homosexual curriculum is going to start not with college. It's already in the colleges, by the way. It's not going to start at the high school or the elementary school. It's going to start with the kindergarten kids. Several years ago, I can remember, and this was being pushed by the homosexuals, but also the immoral, where they were going to start teaching, and this is before we moved here. They were going to start teaching in the Texas schools at the kindergarten level about sex, about homosexuality, and everything else. and they're going to influence a generation so that they grow up thinking there's nothing wrong with homosexuality, it's just simply an alternate lifestyle. And those who would oppose homosexuality, well, they've been taught homosexuality their entire lifetime and that it's something very natural and good. Remember, they're always going to portray homosexuals in a positive light, and they're going to portray Christians or Christianity in a negative light. Now then, you tell me, when a child grows up in that type of an environment, what his view toward Christianity is going to be. And isn't it the case that that's exactly what we're seeing within our society today? There's also the Offense of Marriage Act. This would repeal all of the defense of marriage laws, those laws stating that marriage is between a man and a woman. And if this law would be passed, then homosexual marriages would be automatically legal in every state. We have a problem even within every state nowadays because it has always been historically true that if someone gets married in one state, that all states recognize that marriage. When you have homosexuals going to a certain state and that state allowing homosexual marriages, which many of them do now, then what's going to happen in relationship to the other states? That's why the defense of marriage laws were being passed, to try to prevent a state having to recognize the marriage, homosexual marriage, that took place in another state. But if the Offense of Marriage Act passes, then all of those laws are immediately stricken off the books. And every state must recognize homosexual marriages. And guess what's going to come next? Once they get the aspect that you have to recognize their marriages, then you're going to have to also be performing their marriages. And they're all, if you remember last year when Brother Lynn Parker spoke, dealing with some of these problems, he mentioned about court cases that were already taking place at that time, in which people were being taken to court because they refused to deal with homosexual marriages and participate in them. So what happens when, for example, two homosexuals come here and want to get married? If you don't do it, you've broken the law. You're now an illegal organization. And all of the tax-exempt aspects are removed. They can come in and they can confiscate all of the property. You see, we're facing problems within our society. Why? Because we've allowed these immoral, ungodly people to gain a foothold. Also, we see in this, not just from the homosexual aspect, but the destruction of marriage itself. Of course, there is that aspect of homosexual marriages that will destroy marriage itself. But once you allow homosexuality to be considered as a normal way of lifestyle, God just made them that way and they just love each other, and so since they love each other, they need to have the right to get married. Every argument that the homosexuals make for homosexuality will then be made for pedophilia. I have in my on my computer files that I copied from newspapers of where a man married a dog. Wasn't here in the United States. So you have bestiality. What's going to be wrong with it? Every argument that the homosexuals use can be used for that. And then one where a man married a tree. Yeah, you got that right. I kind of laugh at that one myself. But there was a marriage of a man to a tree. As ridiculous as that sounds, but yet that's what our society is coming to. And so homosexuality and homosexual marriages will simply lead to the acceptance of other types of perversion. Then, not only in regards to marriage itself, there's been the destruction of marriages by those who, through the years, have advocated group marriages. Go back to the 60s, and you see the hippie movement. And what did you have? Basically, you had groups of individuals all having sex together. Well, some during that period of time advocated for group marriages, where one individual would marry several people. In a Facebook group that I am a part of, there was a man, supposedly a member of the church, who advocated and does advocate for polygamy today. Now, a woman cannot have several husbands, but there's nothing wrong with one man having several wives. He almost, if he did not, he came close to saying basically women in marriages were slaves. Well, if you're taking an aspect of polygamy in that way, you basically are trying to make them such. But there's not a hair's difference between that. And this is someone who's supposedly a member of the church, and he argued vociferously for polygamy and for our acceptance of it. There's not a hair's difference between that and group marriages. Then there are also those through the years who have argued for contract marriages. Well, in one sense, marriage is a contract, but that's not what they're talking about. It would be like you would sign a contract that you would be married to your spouse for X number of years. Whether that be 1 year, as some would say, or 5 years, or 10 years. I guess you could set the amount of time yourself. And so we're going to be married for that long. At the end of the contract, guess what? You're free. There's no divorce that takes place. The contract's over with, and you go your separate ways. Or you can renew the contract if you want to do that. That, again, has been argued in our society for several years. The destruction of the marriage. But what we see today, even more so, is a living together without the benefit of marriage. Marriages in our society are becoming passé. Young people just simply don't get married. They just start living together. And if they get tired of each other, that way they don't have to worry about getting a divorce and all of the legal aspects. Anyway, it's just a piece of paper, as they so many times argue. These things are leading our society to the end or the death of marriage itself. Some would want to take marriage out of the government's hand, in a sense. that government has nothing to do with marriages whatsoever. Well, think about that for a minute. If they do, then who controls it? Nobody does. And see, that allows then all of these things to take place. Get the government out of it, anything goes. And that's what a lot of people are arguing for nowadays. Just get the government out of it. Government shouldn't have anything to do with marriages. And some of them will say it's just a social, some of them will say it's just a religious act anyway. And so let the church take care of it. Well, it's not just that. It's not simply a religious thing. The church doesn't control marriages. Marriage is not a church thing. Yes, it is an institution that God established, and He recognizes and controls it in that sense, but it's not something that's church ordained. It is a society aspect and a government aspect. But they want to get the government out of it so that they can do whatever they want to. If you get the government out, there's no rules, no regulations, and automatically you bring in all of the homosexual marriages, you bring in all of the group marriages, you bring in polygamy and all of these other things. No matter what it is. The destruction of our society is what we're seeing. Because as the home goes, so goes the nation. And you can say as home goes, so goes the church, but it is very real and true that as the home goes, so goes the nation. But then, not only in the homosexual and marriage realm, abortion has become a plague upon our society. The Roe v. Wade decision by the Supreme Court in January of 1973, in a vote of 7-2, some think it was just one judge that was a swing vote that voted for the legalization of abortion on demand. It wasn't. There have been cases since Roe v. Wade in which there was a one-vote swing in relationship to things dealing with abortion, but the Roe v. Wade decision was a 7-2 decision in favor of legalizing abortion on demand. Since that time, and it's hard to get exact figures, but it has been estimated that over 50 million unborn babies have been aborted since that time. 50 million. You know, we talk about and we remember very well and are constantly reminded about the Holocaust in Germany, in which Hitler and the Nazis killed 6 million Jews. There were a lot more killed other than Jews, but it's always the 6 million Jews that we're reminded of. But many more were executed by the Nazi regime in those death camps. But notice the comparison. You had 6 million killed by the Nazi regime and Hitler, and we call that a Holocaust. We have 50 million that our nation has legally murdered, and we think nothing about it. We should not, and we need to realize this, we should not approve of breaking the law, even in our opposition of what is wrong. No doubt all of us remember Paul Hill and his murdering the abortion doctor here in Pensacola. That act was morally wrong. but we need to oppose those things that are wrong. We need to do it in a legal way, but we need to oppose them. And yes, we within our society, at least at this time, can still be legally opposed to these things. And we can do things legally to try to oppose it. And we should. One of the greatest things is to teach people respect for life. The type of respect that God demands that we have throughout the Scriptures. That God is the one who breathed into man's nostrils the breath of life. God is the one who provides man his spirit. And as such, we need to have a respect for that life. When does that life begin? It begins at conception. There's no argument really about that. There's no way that anyone can argue that life begins at conception. If you want to test that out, go destroy some eagle's eggs and see what happens to you. Now, if you don't know what will happen, you're going to end up in jail because it is illegal to destroy eagle's eggs. Why? Because they're eagles. And the government recognizes that. The court recognizes that. We recognize that. When two humans cohabitate and produce an offspring, from the very point of conception, that offspring is human. And really, you've got within the womb something that is either human or non-human. The law of the excluded middle shows that. It's either human or non-human. Well, when we start showing that it has the proper number of genes that is human, and the genes are human, the genetic code is for humans, that it has heartbeat, that it has its own heartbeat, it has its own breathing, it has its own fingers and toes. Every aspect is human. But we've gone from just the first trimester abortions, which Roe v. Wade tried to enforce, or tried to set forth, that yes, during that first trimester, abortion on demand is all right. But then it started extending itself. So much so that now then you can have what they refer to as partial birth abortion. That you allow part of the baby to be born, and then before the head comes out, you stick scissors into the brain of that baby, and you destroy that baby and kill it, suck the brains out, and then allow the completion of the birth. And we say, that's all right now. No, it's not. It's still murder. And we've gone from that to what is infanticide. Now, infanticide is the killing of babies once they have already been born. There have been cases that have gone to our governments, our state governments and federal, that try to protect babies that are born alive after a botched abortion. And so far, and our president voted against protecting those babies. And so far, the idea is you don't have to protect them. You can let them die. And so here is a baby that is born alive that you very simply allow to die. Now again, if we call the killing of 6 million people a Holocaust, what is the killing of 50 million? And if Hitler is portrayed, and rightly so, as this horrible, ungodly, wicked individual, one of the most vile humans that ever lived upon the face of this earth. What are we, brethren, in murdering 50 million babies? About 1 to 1.5 million every year. But yet it continues to proliferate. And when that abortion rate comes down a little bit, as it has done within the past few years, it was up around 1.5. Now then lately, last few years, it came down to about 1.2 million a year. The abortionist gets upset. And they want more abortions to take place. What does that speak of us as a nation? But then we have, very simply, the open fornication and adultery that's taken place in our society. Immorality of all sorts. We have, for years, had those who vividly proclaim, oh, go out and have an affair. Of course, they have to call it affair and call it something other than the sin that it is, fornication and adultery. Why? Because it's going to help your marriage. And we've had marriage counselors counsel married people along that line. Commit fornication, commit adultery. And now then, with our young kids growing up and going to school, they're going to do it anyway. So let's try to make sure that they practice safe sex. And what are we going to do? We're going to provide them condoms in order to have safe sex. And then we start wondering, what's our world coming to? What's our society going to be like? But worse than that, maybe, is the encouragement from our federal government of young kids having babies. If you don't think they know how to work the system, you're sadly mistaken. Because the system says, you have a baby, we're going to give you money. So have another baby, so you can get more money. And have another one, so you can get some more money. And the more babies that you have, the more money we're going to provide you. And so guess what they do? They go out and they start having babies. Duh. Why aren't they? Why wouldn't they? With that type of a system that we have set up within our nation. You see, our government ends up encouraging the immorality and the ungodliness of our society. But also the immodesty that is so rampant among us. There is today the acceptance of pornography. In fact, a lot of people, very simply, they don't know what pornography is. I remember many individuals who talk about in Playboy, and that's not pornographic. Well, yes, it is. Because our society no longer has a standard of morality that will say this is pornographic. Why? Because it has become an accepted thing. Look at the way Hugh Hefner is even looked at and viewed within our society. He's glorified. Why? Because he portrays women in a naked state. Pornographic magazine. But getting away from just that total nakedness, from a biblical standpoint, so many of the people walking around in which we associate with are, from a biblical standpoint, naked. You can't go to the beach without seeing nakedness Oh no, they've put a little bit of clothing on. But from a biblical standpoint, they're naked. Why? Because biblically speaking, the Bible defines nakedness when you start lowering the neckline below the neck and raising the hemline above the knee. When people start showing off their thighs, and this is men or women, it doesn't make any difference. Showing off the thigh, the Bible describes that as being naked. When they start taking off, and men taking off their shirts, going around shirtless, they're naked from a biblical standpoint. I know our society doesn't think that, doesn't consider. When women start lowering the necklines and showing off the breast, they're naked from a biblical standpoint again. And yet, our society thinks nothing about it. The see-through clothing that is worn by so many today is portraying people's nakedness. When we wear such skin-tight clothing to show off every curve, then we are appealing to an aspect of our physicality that God does not want us appealing to. God wants us to be and have a type of attitude that is holy and righteous, and that righteousness and that purity shows through in the clothing that we wear. I don't have time this evening to go into a study of 1 Timothy 2 and verse 9 and 10, and 1 Peter the 3rd chapter, verse 3 and verse 4. But we've heard the lessons, be modest, but yet how many times do we define what that modesty is? Brethren, when the neckline starts going down and the hemline start coming up, and we start wearing in what's fashionable today, showing off the belly, or clothes that show off the belly and show the breast or the thighs, then these things are wrong, brethren. They need to be recognized as being naked. But we don't do that anymore, do we? You can go to the Walmart or to the mall and just walk around and you see nakedness from a biblical standpoint all the time. And nobody thinks anything about it anymore. The profanity that is seen within our society today, vulgar, crude language, it is unusual to see and to be around someone who does not use vulgar language in our society. It has become common. And yes, we've heard lessons of, that first time in which the movies and Gone with the Wind, in which Rhett Butler made his famous statement. And from that one time, that one statement to what we see now, even on television, a constant bombardment of profanity, of crude, vulgar language, base language. Our society is degenerating to the point where, yes, it's going to be difficult for God not to apologize for Sodom and Gomorrah. Gambling is seen and advocated by our nation. Not just going to Las Vegas or Reno or one of these other casinos, but now then we have the dog racing and the horse racing. And now then the government-sponsored lottery. And then you think, here's how many schools will sell chances for something. All that is gambling. It might be on a smaller scale, but that's what it is. These things and many more we could talk about. I realize, brethren, don't have time to really go into this, but we live in the world. but we're not to be of the world. Now, we use the illustration, many times you've heard it, no doubt, of putting a boat in water. As long as the water is outside of the boat, you're all right. If the water starts getting in the boat, though, there's going to be problems, aren't there? We live in the world, but the problem is we're allowing the world to become a part of the church. Those things that we see within society, they're making their inroads into the church. We have churches today that advocate homosexuality and will accept homosexual marriages. That's churches of Christ, by the way. I'm not talking about those other denominations. I'll use that term in relationship to those people because that's all that they are too. They're a denomination, but they have Church of Christ on the building. The church today has been inundated with all of the problems that we see in society, and so many times we're not keeping it out. And in so many places it's not kept out. Yes, we live in the world, but we're not to be of it. We are to remain unspotted from the world. James said that pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, that we should visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. James 1:27. Do we keep ourselves unspotted from the world? Have we kept the church unspotted from the world? We are to abstain from all appearance of evil when we prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. 1 Thessalonians 5:21 and 22. We cannot be the friend of the world and be the friend of God. We're at war with the world. We're at war with the things of this world, and yes, even our own society and our own government. When our government starts advocating and starts doing things that are contrary to the will of God, we are at war. And if we don't wake up, the war will be lost before we even enter into it. If you're not and have not entered into that battle by becoming a Christian and being and living the faithful Christian life, yes, in that fight for right, so that, yes, righteousness will exalt the nation, sin gets a reproach to any people. Our nation is engulfed in sin, and we've got to fight against it. And we've got to be upholding righteousness. We have to be a light in a world of darkness that's all around us. And if you haven't entered into that fight, then do so this evening by your obedience to the gospel. If you've entered the fight, but you haven't continued the fight, haven't continued to stress righteousness and live righteous within your life, and you've allowed the world to come into your life, why not repent of your sins and once again enter into that battle against Satan and the forces of Satan and all of the things that Satan will bring against us? If you need to come this evening, we encourage you to do so as we stand and sing.